So I'm a college student, right? And I double major in both film and history. And it isn't always immediately obvious how those two things overlap, but I think people often underestimate how important it is to understand the context or historical moment of something like a movie for it to make much sense at all. If you want to make meaning out of much of anything, you have to first understand the world in which it was created. A good example of this is The Wizard of Oz. Now, there are several versions of The Wizard of Oz, including various books, plays, and movies, but the version I and most people nowadays are familiar with is the 1939 film in all its Technicolor glory. Watching the movie without any understanding of the political situation in the 1890s when the story was first written, it comes off as a confusing, silly, but ultimately enjoyable romp through a fantasy world and perhaps a parable about knowing who you are or some such. And the story is fully enjoyable in that capacity. It holds up, or at least it did to my 8-year-old self when I first saw the movie. That is, of course, except for the flying monkeys. Those are just creepy. Much after my 8-year-old self first saw The Wizard of Oz, in an American history course I took in high school, we were learning about the long-standing fight between the Silverites and Populists on one side, and the proponents of the gold standard on the other, over whether or not to incorporate silver along with gold as a monetary standard in the United States. It was there that I first learned about this theory that several historians have formulated over the years, that The Wizard of Oz, as Frank L. Baum originally wrote it, is actually an elaborate allegory for U.S. monetary policy and other related contemporary politics of the 1890s. Some of these historians have posed that the yellow brick road represents the gold standard, which leads to the Emerald City, which represents the fraudulent nature of green paper money. In the story, Dorothy is of course from Kansas, which is representative of the American West, which not only had a monetary interest in silver mining, because that's where the silver is, but also had an interest in steady inflation to promote growth. And at the end of the story, Dorothy could only return home by using her own silver slippers. In the movie, they got changed to ruby slippers, but originally they were silver. She hadn't realized that the solution to all her problems had been there the whole time, just as Westerners hadn't realized that the solution to all their monetary problems lay in their own silver resources. There are a number of other correlations, including the Scarecrow representing American farmers and the Tin Man representing America's waning steel industry. Historians have been quite exhaustive in pulling meaning from the story, and if you give it a quick Google search, you can find numerous theories about what every little detail represents. Of course, all of this later interpretation can never be proven as the author's intent, but it does provide an interesting reading of the text and makes The Wizard of Oz a much more interesting story to me, now that I can place it in a historical moment and understand its political underpinnings. Part of the problem of context is that things are formed in a specific moment, and as time goes on, a text will gradually lose its meaning as the interests and squabbles of the time are replaced with new and evolving interests and squabbles. It is, I think, a testament then to truly timeless works like Hamlet, Don Quixote, and the Epic of Gilgamesh that they have remained relevant and meaningful to so many people well outside of their original context. Humans have and will continue to change in leaps and strides at such a pace that a few generations from now, our successors will hardly understand what our lives were like at all. We will seem alien to them. We then can only hope to leave behind enough truly great work that they may be reminded from time to time that our humanity is the same as theirs. It's an important task. I'll see you next week. I'd be in the corner of the first and I'd say the most powerful and influential woman pharaoh, Hatshepsut.
And I really wasn't aware that restaurants could have sour cream that wasn't, the best, but, the burrito tasted relatively normal.